an immature successor must decide between securing his inheritance and being with the woman he loves. Preparing for his mother's fundraising event, a wealthy yet alcohol-dependent heir named Arthur Back dresses up as Batman while his chauffeur Bitterman dons the Robin costume. Bitterman drives the Batmobile with the heir next to him as they head to their destination. Suddenly, the police chase after them, asking them to pull over for speeding. However, the chauffeur can't slow down because he can't find the brakes. Suddenly, the intoxicated and curious Arthur presses a button in the car, causing it to accelerate and collide with the charging bull statue. Consequently, he and his chauffeur are arrested. Meanwhile, Vivian Bach, the heir's mother and CEO of Bach Worldwide, is already at the formal event. Suddenly, businesswoman Susan Johnson presents her with a photo of her son's troublesome behavior. Arthur posts bail for himself and the other inmates shortly after incarceration, leading to everyone's release. Upon exiting the police station, the wealthy man-child faces a journalist questioning his extravagant spending during a recession. Seconds later, Arthur declares that the recession is over as he distributes cash. Then he invites everyone to his apartment for a party. The following morning, Lillian Hobson, the drunkard's nanny, cleans up the guest's mess. When she enters the hungover man's bedroom, she finds him beside a woman named Tiffany. She then greets and informs him that his mother wishes to speak with him. At first, Arthur declines and behaves childishly, insisting that he only wants to work from bed that day. However, the woman confiscates his hip flask and strictly orders him to get up and eat breakfast. After eating, the immature man takes a bath and uses binoculars to watch people walking down the street. The nanny then brings Arthur to the Bach Worldwide building to meet with his mother. On his way to Vivian's office, the childish man runs into Susan, whom he had ghosted after 3 months of dating. Upon meeting her son, Vivian scolds him for getting into so much trouble. She reminds him that he's the sole heir and explains that his arrests frighten investors. To help his son man up, the executive plans to marry him to Susan, as she sees her as a reliable partner. She points out that his union with a businesswoman will help reassure shareholders about their investments. However, Arthur refuses and claims he'll marry for love, implying he won't do it to protect a corporation's image. Vivian appreciates his integrity but clarifies that he will lose his inheritance of $950 million. Afraid to lose his wealth, the man-child agrees to marry Susan. His mother congratulates him, as he will secure his financial future. Later, Arthur examines his mother's ring in the elevator, which he is told to give to his future wife. When he tells Hobson that he doesn't like Susan, the nanny comments that the businesswoman is intelligent and can care for him. However, the heir thinks that his mother just wants to control him. Leaving the building, Hobson accompanies Arthur to an auction house, where he acquires Abraham Lincoln's suit and its stand. As they stroll down the street afterward, the immature man leaves the nanny and directs her to locate Bitterman. The immature heir then wanders and ends up at Grand Central Terminal, where he encounters a tour guide named Naomi Quinn who initially mistakes him for a beggar. He is immediately captivated by her free-spirited nature and decides to follow her. The woman then guides the tourists to the center of the terminal and reclines on the floor with them to enthusiastically describe the place's stunning ceiling. Upon witnessing this, Arthur lies beside her and mentions that he has a similar view in his apartment. Suddenly, a police officer interrupts Naomi because she doesn't have a tour license. The heir talks to the cop when he hears this, while the woman slowly moves away and runs. When the policeman pursues her, Arthur follows and helps the woman when she gets cornered. The heir explains that the tour guide's activities are not illegal because she was touring with her family. Then he claims to be the woman's fiancé. As an act, they passionately kiss each other in front of the cops. When one of the officers confirms what they ate for their first date, they both mention PEZ candies. Although the cops remain skeptical, they eventually let them go. Later, Naomi inquires about Arthur's identity, but he chooses not to reveal it just yet. Suddenly, Hobson arrives and directs the man-child to get into the car. When the heir declines to comply, the elderly woman discloses to the tour guide that she is his nanny and that his mother employs her. Before Naomi leaves, Arthur expresses his desire to see her again. Initially, the tour guide declines, citing her reluctance to date men with nannies. However, she eventually gives him her phone number. During his boxing session, Arthur shares his day with his coach Evander, including the encounter with a beautiful tour guide. He describes his attraction to her, admiring her unique perspective on the world. Upon hearing this, Hobson reacts, suggesting they come from different backgrounds. grounds. Shortly afterward, she strictly instructs him to get dressed because his next task is to get Susan's father's approval for their marriage. Upon reaching the Burt Johnson Tower, Arthur seeks advice from Bitterman, who advises him to use the line, "I like your tower, but I love your daughter," when speaking to the executive. Upon entering the building, a worker gives the intoxicated man a hard hat as he waits for Susan's father. Out of boredom, the man-child starts playing with a nail gun and accidentally shoots Burt Johnson behind a curtain. While bleeding, the executive talks to the man-child, believing that Susan can positively impact him much like she did with a crack house turning into a condo. He then sternly orders him to obey his daughter. Suddenly, Burt activates his table saw, claiming it's the most dangerous tool on a job site. He instructs Arthur to use it. The heir is hesitant but manages to slice through a wooden board with it, feeling a sense of accomplishment. When the immature man wants to put something else in, Burt suggests his finger, assuring him the machine stops when it detects moisture. When the heir declines this risky request, the executive insists he uses his tongue instead. As he approaches the saw, fear overtakes him and he calls for his nanny. Suddenly, the equipment detects the moisture of his tongue and promptly stops, relieving him. Afterward, the heir takes the chauffeur's advice and uses the line, "I like your tower, but I love your daughter," to ask Burt for his daughter's hand in marriage. The older man then approves and gives his blessing. That night, Arthur and Susan meet at a fancy restaurant where he tells her they shouldn't marry due to their differences. However, the woman sees it as a business partnership and instructs him to propose. The wealthy man then declines and embarrasses himself in front of everyone by behaving childishly. To get him to comply, Susan reminds him of her dad's table saw and then instructs him to turn around and publicly confess his love for her. Frightened, Arthur obeys and proposes to the businesswoman, which leads to applause from the other guests. Afterward, the heir drinks in his car, feeling disappointed in himself. Hobson assures him that he'll continue to be well off because of his decision, but the man states that he'd rather be poor and happy. To dissuade Arthur from his negative thoughts, Hobson explains that poor people have jobs and then hands him his vitamins. However, despite his nanny's opinions, the heir goes to the Grand Central Terminal to see Naomi. He then brings her inside the terminal, revealing that he cleared it so they could enjoy their dinner date. As they sit down, a waiter arrives with a cloche, unveiling PEZ versions of themselves and candles as their meal. This gesture makes the tour guide happy. Suddenly, she spots acrobats behind the heir, and he explains that he also hired them for the night. Shortly after, he plans to take her to Italy on a jet. However, the tour guide declines, suggesting they stay in the terminal. Subsequently, Naomi takes Arthur to the Whispering Gallery and shows him how they can communicate by talking from opposite corners. He is filled with wonder when he discovers that he can hear her clearly despite the distance. After their date, the couple goes to Naomi's place to have SpaghettiOs. During their conversation, the tour guide discloses that her mother passed away the year before, while the heir shares that his father had a heart attack when he was a child. Later, Arthur learns that the woman used to write children's storybooks. He applauds her work and suggests that she consider leaving her current job to devote more energy to doing what she loves. However, Naomi mentions that she can't afford to pay her bills if she pursues her passion full-time. When Arthur suggests she could earn well through her published works, she implies that such success may not be achievable for poor people like her. The next day, Arthur, his mom, and his fiance's family pose for an engagement photo for a magazine. During the photo shoot, the inheritor asks his mother what would happen if he falls for someone else. In response, she says she'd congratulate him but points out that such magical relationships often lead to financial problems. A moment later, while the photographer takes Susan and Arthur's photo, the businesswoman confronts him for seeing another girl. She directs the horse to take them to the garden when he denies it. On their way, Susan shares that she knows his secret date with Naomi because it was published in the newspapers. In response, Arthur sarcastically apologizes and suggests he'd understand if she wanted to cancel the wedding. However, the selfish woman insists that their marriage will proceed as planned, as she intends to take control of Bach worldwide. The heir gets ready that evening because he's invited Naomi to his apartment. Upon hearing this, Hobson thinks it's a bad idea and advises him to inform the tour guide that he's already engaged. When the doorbell rings, Arthur hurries to answer it, only to find a slightly intoxicated Susan who wants to spend a romantic night with him. Suddenly, he receives a text from Naomi, prompting him to lead his fiancée to the bedroom and hide her there. When the tour guide arrives, he invites her inside, and she immediately admires the apartment. When Arthur notices her heading towards the bedroom, he redirects her. Hobson takes over and leads her to the theater room while he tends to Susan. While the businesswoman attempts to force her fiancé into bed, Naomi and Hobson bond as they watch cartoons. Suddenly, Naomi grows concerned that Arthur is taking too long, prompting the nanny to check on him. The heir attempts to evade Susan in the bedroom by crawling under his magnetic bed. When she follows, the bed's magnetic pull traps her due to her steel clothing. Arthur takes advantage of the situation, leaving her stuck and assuring her that Hobson will take care of everything. Afterwards, he hurries to meet Naomi. Before leaving with her, he expresses his gratitude to Hobson, knowing she is fond of the tour guide. Afterward, Arthur takes his date to a nearby pond, and they discuss the children's book Frog and Toad, a favorite from their childhood. After reciting lines from the story, they share a kiss. That night, Hobson reads Frog and Toad to the immature man before bedtime. Once she is finished, the heir confesses that he can't bring himself to tell Naomi the truth. Upon hearing this, the elderly woman acknowledges that the tour guide is lovely, but emphasizes that Arthur can't marry her because he can't imagine life without his wealth. In response, the immature man claims he can adapt to a less extravagant lifestyle and wants to prove it by getting a job. The following day, the wealthy man secures a job as a candy store cashier. However, during his training with the supervisor Peter, he doesn't take the job seriously and prefers to act as the gummy bear man instead. Because of this, the manager grants him a day off and instructs him to return the next day. That evening, Arthur enjoys quality time with Naomi. They use binoculars to watch people downtown and share kisses under his bedroom spinning solar system installation. The next day at work, the manager reprimands the heir for eating the candies while on duty. Consequently, the supervisor assigns his immature employee to work in the stockroom. However, when Arthur discovers the gummy bear man in the area, he pays him $10,000 to borrow and wear the costume for an hour. He then goes to the entrance, entertains the customers, and offers them candies. When Peter catches the immature man taking over another employee's role, he terminates his employment. Upon returning home, the inheritor reflects on the situation and realizes that he must be sober to take a job seriously. The next day, Hobson accompanies a disguised Arthur to a meeting of people striving for sobriety. However, as someone shares their story, the heir becomes disheartened, expressing that the gathering encourages him to drink more. When he is allowed to speak, the heir introduces himself as Gandalf and explains that he attended the meeting because he wishes to reduce his drinking and then exits the door. Suddenly, Hobson stands up and continues the successor's story as if it were hers. Later in the car, Arthur admits that he appreciated what she did. That evening, Arthur calls his mother trying to cancel the wedding. While Vivian reminds him that he can back out anytime, she implies that marrying Susan is his only option to maintain his wealth. Afterward, the inheritor goes to Naomi's apartment and confesses he's engaged with another woman. He clarifies that he doesn't like Susan but has to marry her because of the money. Upon learning the truth, the tour guide gets upset and asks him to leave. Before heading out, he hands her an envelope with a check amounting to $999,000, mentioning it's for her dad and writing career. However, the tour guide declines the offer, asserting that she doesn't need it. The following days, Arthur gets ready for his wedding while Naomi focuses on completing her children's book. One day, while taking a bath, the heir calls for Hobson, but Bitterman arrives and explains that his nanny is in bed with a headache. Immediately, he visits the elderly woman in her room, and she playfully suggests that she's about to pass away. When she asks how he's doing, Arthur mentions that Naomi has stopped talking to him. This leads the nanny to make a snide comment about the tour guide. Offended by her words, he angrily exits the room, leaving her smirking. The following day, Hobson visits Vivian in her office and attempts to persuade the executive that Naomi is a good match for her son. However, the boss reminds her that Arthur is already engaged to Susan, highlighting that she needs the marriage due to his weakness. In response, the nanny argues that the heir is more capable than she believes. Afterward, Hobson visits Naomi and urges her not to give up on the successor because he genuinely loves her. However, as she is about to leave, she suddenly experiences a severe headache. After this, Naomi contacts the wealthy man to inform him they are at the hospital. Arthur then visits his nanny, who he discovers has been undergoing tests for months. When he confronts her for not informing him, she explains that she doesn't want him to worry about her. As a gesture, she gives him her toys as a get-well gift, which he greatly appreciates. Subsequently, Arthur meets up with Naomi, and they have a conversation. He congratulates her when she enthusiastically tells him she has successfully sold her book. However, the writer confesses that she is still upset with him for lying but admits that he pushed her to write the book. Suddenly, Susan arrives and discloses that Arthur's company has acquired the publishing company handling her book. Realizing that her success was more due to the heir's influence, Naomi feels offended and leaves. Arthur chases after a tearful Naomi. She emphasizes the significance of earning something independently and advises the immature man to try the same experience. When Hobson returns home from the hospital, Arthur takes care of her. He prepares her meals and watches bears with her in the theater room. One evening, he asks her if she has ever been in love, to which she responds that she loved someone from Spain. However, when she was planning to leave, the heir's father passed away, leading her to stay and care for him. The following day, Arthur wakes up and discovers that Hobson passed in her sleep. As he grieves, he hosts a house party and goes back to drinking. On his wedding day, he arrives at the church late and intoxicated, disappointing Vivienne. While drinking, he discovers a letter from Hobson inside his hip flask. Unable to read it himself, the successor asks a child for assistance. As he listens to the young boy, the wealthy man tears up upon learning that his nanny is encouraging him to follow his heart. As a result, Arthur speaks up during the wedding ceremony when the priest asks if anyone objects. He announces that their wedding is a scam and that Susan deserves someone better. In response, the furious bride punches him in the face and accidentally exposes her selfish plan to take control of Bach worldwide to the public. Upon hearing this, Vivienne intervenes and questions if her son truly wants to give up his inheritance. He removes his expensive clothing, except for the undergarment Hobson gave him to prove he can be self-reliant. Afterward, Vivienne interrupts Arthur as he hurries to get into a cab. She expresses her disappointment over his public humiliation but also commends him for standing up for himself and exposing the truth about Susan. She then hands him $1 for the cab fare and wishes him luck in his new life as an independent man. Upon arriving in Queens, he finds Naomi and shares the news of his failed wedding and Hobson's passing. In response, the writer sympathizes with him but clarifies that she cannot replace his nanny. 6 months later, Arthur works on getting sober as he regularly attends group sessions. One morning, he passes by a bookstore and sees Naomi's book on display. Before purchasing it, he discovers that the book is dedicated to him. When he learns that the writer has a book reading event that afternoon, he goes to the library and publicly apologizes to her in front of the children. He confesses his true feelings and points out that he wants to take care of her, prompting the woman to approach and kiss him. After reconciling, the couple leaves the library, and the wealthy man shares that he has been able to retain his inheritance for running the Bach charity. Then, Bitterman drives them through New York using the Batmobile, with the police pursuing them.